I thought the library was just a quiet place to read, until she looked at me that night and said, "Come after hours, I'll teach you more than books can." I used to think libraries were quiet because no one had anything left to say. But that night, as I stepped into the old city library after work, I realized, some silences hold more stories than any book ever could. It was near closing time. The faint hum of ceiling fans, the soft glow of yellow lamps, the smell of aging paper, everything felt frozen in time. I went there often, mostly to escape the noise of the world outside. But that night, she was there. The librarian. She was different from anyone I'd ever met, calm, elegant, and a little mysterious. Her hair fell in gentle waves, touched with silver near the temples, and her eyes had the kind of depth that made you forget what you were about to say. She wasn't just beautiful, she carried herself with quiet confidence, like someone who had already lived through storms and learned how to stand still in the rain. When she looked up from her desk and saw me, her expression softened, a polite smile, restrained but warm. "Back again?" she asked, her voice low, melodic, the kind that made you listen twice just to hear it again. I nodded, holding out the book I'd finished. "I guess I'm addicted." She chuckled lightly, not a full laugh, but enough to make me want to hear it again. "There are worse addictions," she said, stamping the return slip. As I reached for a new book, her hand brushed mine, just for a second. Warm. Steady. It wasn't a spark, it was quieter than that. More like a pulse that echoed between us and faded before either of us could acknowledge it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she tilted her head slightly, studying me, not as a librarian assessing a borrower, but as a woman trying to read someone's story. "Why do you always come so late?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then said the truth. "Because this place feels alive when everything else is asleep." Her lips curved, the faintest smile, almost approving. "Maybe," she said, "you're just listening to the right kind of silence." I didn't know what she meant then. But the way she said it, calm, deliberate, made something inside me shift. That night, I left with more than a book in my hand. I left with a voice in my mind, one I knew I'd want to hear again. The next few evenings passed the same way, quiet, familiar, predictable. I'd walk in just before closing, return a book, exchange a few polite words, and leave with another story I'd pretend to read, but mostly. I thought about her. The librarian. Ms. Evelyn Hart, that's what her nameplate said. But somehow, Evelyn felt more fitting. It suited the soft way she spoke, the calm steadiness in her eyes, and the unspoken warmth she carried like a hidden secret. That night, the library was emptier than usual. Only one lamp burned behind her desk, casting long golden shadows across the floor. The rain outside had just begun, slow, rhythmic drops tapping against the tall windows like a gentle metronome. She was shelving books when she noticed me. "You really do prefer the quiet hours," she said, half smiling. I shrugged lightly. "I think I just like how this place feels when everyone's gone." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment, thoughtful. Then she set the books down and walked closer, her heels clicking softly against the marble. "There's something about this time of night," she said. "The stories stop pretending." I frowned slightly, intrigued. Pretending? She looked past me, at the endless rows of books behind us. During the day, people rush through words. They read, but they don't feel. At night, the silence gives the stories room to breathe. Her voice dropped lower. "If you really want to understand what they mean, come after hours." The way she said it wasn't an invitation, not exactly. More like a challenge, wrapped in mystery. I didn't respond right away. My heart gave a quiet, nervous thud, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if she'd meant it the way it sounded. She must have noticed my hesitation because she smiled, almost teasingly. "It's not against the rules," she added. "Not if I'm the one keeping the lights on." And then she turned away, leaving me standing there, caught between disbelief and curiosity. As I walked home that night, her words replayed in my head again and again. Come after hours. Outside, the city felt louder than usual. But inside, all I could hear was her voice, calm, knowing, impossible to ignore. It wasn't about books anymore. Something deeper had begun to turn its first page. I told myself I wasn't going to go. That her words, come after hours, were just a passing comment. Something said in the quiet of a slow evening. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about it. 3 nights later, I found myself standing in front of the library door again, lights dim, the city already sinking into silence. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the orange glow of the lamps. The world felt washed clean, and I was about to step into something new. The door was unlocked. Inside, the library was half-lit, the golden glow of a single desk lamp spilling across the aisles like liquid warmth. She was there, sitting behind her desk, reading a worn novel. When she looked up, her expression didn't show surprise. I was wondering if you'd really come, she said softly. I wasn't sure I would, I admitted, closing the door behind me. Her smile deepened. That's usually how the best chapters begin. She gestured toward a small table by the window, where 2 cups of tea were already waiting, steam curling into the air. I sat down, the old wooden chair creaking beneath me, while she moved gracefully, almost soundlessly, through the room. Do you always drink tea in libraries? I asked. Only when I'm sharing stories, she said, sitting across from me. For a while, we didn't talk about books at all. She asked about my life, what I did, what I wanted, what I was running from. Her questions weren't intrusive, they felt like invitations, gentle and patient. I found myself telling her things I hadn't said aloud in years, about my uncertainty, my restlessness, how I'd always been searching for something that made sense. She listened the way few people ever do, fully, quietly, without judgment. Then she leaned forward, tapping the cover of the book she'd been reading. This, she said, isn't about knowledge. It's about reflection. Sometimes a story teaches us more about ourselves than we want to know. Her hand brushed mine as she passed me the book. The touch was unintentional, soft, fleeting, yet it lingered, sparking something unspoken between us. The rest of the night blurred into gentle conversation and unhurried silence. When I finally left, she said, almost under her breath, next time, you choose the story. And as the door closed behind me, I realized, she wasn't just teaching me about books. She was teaching me how to feel again. I returned 2 nights later, pretending it was just to return the book. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about that anymore. The library door creaked softly as I stepped inside. Only one lamp was lit, the one by her desk, casting a soft golden halo across the room. Outside, the world was quiet. Inside, time seemed to breathe slower. Evelyn looked up from her reading. That same calm smile appeared, though this time, it felt different, warmer, more personal. You chose the story, she said, noticing the book in my hand. I did, I replied. But I think I came back for the storyteller. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment before she looked away, hiding a faint smile. Flattery, she murmured, doesn't work on librarians. Then maybe honesty will, I said softly. For a moment, the air between us thickened, not with awkwardness, but with awareness. She walked over, her footsteps light against the wooden floor. Let's read, she said, as if those 2 words could steady whatever was happening between us. We sat side by side at the long wooden table, the book open between us. She leaned closer to point out a line, her shoulder brushing mine. The contact was so gentle it could have gone unnoticed, but it didn't. I felt it like a current, small but undeniable. Her perfume was faint, something like jasmine and old paper. Her voice, as she read aloud, carried a warmth that wrapped around every word. I found myself listening less to the story and more to the way she spoke, how each pause, each breath, seemed to reveal something she wasn't saying. At one point, our hands met on the page, by accident. We both froze. Her eyes flicked to mine, a quiet question resting there. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, she turned the page, her fingertips trembling just enough for me to notice. The beauty of a story, she said quietly, not looking up, is often found between the lines. Her voice carried more meaning than the words themselves. I nodded, though my heart was too loud to let me speak. As I left that night, the sound of her voice, calm, steady, deliberate, followed me out into the cool air. And I couldn't shake the feeling that we were no longer reading the same book. We were writing one. Together. The weather turned restless the following week. Thick clouds hung over the city, and the air felt heavy with rain. I wasn't sure she'd even be there that night, but I went anyway. Some part of me already knew that whatever was unfolding between us wasn't something I could just walk away from. When I arrived, the lights inside were dim. The library looked almost ethereal, golden pools of lamplight against deep shadows. Evelyn was standing by the tall window, watching the rain pour down in endless sheets. The reflection of the city lights danced on the glass, outlining her silhouette like something fragile and beautiful. You shouldn't have come, she said softly, without turning around. Then why did you leave the door unlocked? I asked. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then, slowly, she turned to face me, her expression calm, but her eyes betraying something far more complicated. Maybe, she said, I wanted someone to share the silence with. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows like a heartbeat. The lights flickered once, twice, and then steadied. She walked to her desk, lighting a small candle, its flame soft and wavering. Power might go out, she murmured. But stories don't need electricity. We sat across from each other, the flickering glow between us. Neither of us spoke for a while. There was no need. The room was filled with the quiet hum of rain, the scent of old paper, and the sound of two people trying not to cross a line that had already blurred. Finally, she said, you know, I look forward to these nights more than I should. Her voice trembled slightly, a rare crack in her composed tone. I felt something twist inside me. Maybe that's because they don't feel like nights in a library anymore. Her eyes lifted to mine, steady, searching. The kind of gaze that pulls the truth out of you. I reached across the table, letting my hand rest near hers, not touching, not yet. Evelyn, I whispered, I don't come here for the books anymore. She didn't move. Just looked down at my hand, then up again. Slowly, almost hesitantly, her fingers brushed mine. That single touch felt louder than the storm outside. For the first time, she didn't pull away. And in that fragile silence, I realized something simple and terrifying: some stories aren't written with words. They're written with moments like this. The rain finally stopped the next evening, leaving the air fresh and cool, like the world had exhaled. I found myself walking to the library again, not because I planned to, but because not going suddenly felt wrong. When I arrived, the lights were low, and soft music drifted faintly from somewhere in the back, a slow piano melody that felt almost too intimate for a place like this. Evelyn sat near the far window, reading by candlelight. She didn't look up when I entered, she just said quietly, I knew you'd come. I smiled. You always seem to know. She closed her book carefully and set it aside. Habit of someone who spent her life reading endings before they happen. Her tone was lighter than usual, but her eyes held a weight, the kind that comes from things left unsaid. I sat across from her, and for a while, neither of us spoke. The candle flickered between us, its flame swaying like it was breathing our hesitation. Finally, she said, almost in a whisper, I wasn't supposed to care this much. Those words hung in the air like smoke, soft, real, impossible to ignore. I wanted to speak, but I didn't know how to answer something that honest. So instead, I let silence do the talking. She looked down at her hands, fingers tracing the edge of a teacup. It's been years since anyone saw me as more than a librarian, she continued. People come here for books, not for me. Her voice cracked slightly on that last word. I didn't think, I just reached out and covered her hand with mine. Her skin was cool at first, then warm. She didn't pull away. Evelyn, I said softly, you make this place feel alive. You make silence feel like a conversation. Her eyes lifted slowly to mine, and in that look, there was everything, gratitude, fear, relief, and something tender that neither of us dared name. She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing. Then she leaned forward just enough for her hand to rest against my chest, a light, uncertain touch that made my breath catch. Thank you, she whispered. For seeing me. That moment didn't feel like a beginning or an end. It felt like a pause, a breath suspended between two hearts that had finally stopped pretending not to hear each other. And for the first time, she let go, not of me, but of the walls she'd built around herself. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the library floor like gold dust. The storm had passed, leaving everything brighter, calmer, even the air seemed to breathe differently. I walked in during regular hours this time. The familiar quiet was there, but it felt changed, softer somehow, as if the library itself remembered what had happened the night before. Evelyn stood by the returns desk, her hair tied loosely, her usual poise intact. But when she saw me, something shifted in her eyes, not surprise, not discomfort, just understanding. Good morning, she said with a gentle smile, the kind that reached her eyes. Morning, I replied, my voice lower than usual. For a few moments, we stayed silent. There were people around this time, readers moving between aisles, students whispering over notes, and yet, it still felt like it was just us. The world outside our small orbit blurred into background noise. I placed a book on the counter, the same one we had read together. She looked down at it, fingers brushing the cover, and then up at me. You finished it, she said softly. I nodded. I think it finished me first. She smiled, faint but full of meaning. Then she leaned in slightly and whispered, some stories aren't meant to be understood, only felt. There it was again, her way of saying things that lingered long after the words ended. As she handed me another book, her fingers brushed mine, a small, deliberate motion that carried more weight than any embrace could have. For a second, everything slowed. The distant shuffle of pages, the ticking clock, even the murmur of voices, all faded beneath the quiet electricity of that touch. I'm glad you came, she said. I don't think I could have stayed away, I admitted. Her eyes softened. Then maybe, she said, you found what you were looking for. I didn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because the truth was already there between us. As I turned to leave, the sunlight caught her face, calm, radiant, at peace. And in that moment, I realized what she had truly given me. It wasn't a lesson from a book. It was something quieter, the reminder that connection doesn't always need grand declarations or perfect timing. Sometimes, it's enough to be seen. To be understood. To be felt, more than books ever can. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more slow burn stories that remind us, real connection still exists, quietly waiting to be found.